Hello, fancy seeing you here. What's a nice person like you doing at a place like this? Welcome to the coaching hour. It's wonderful to see you, even though I can't. Hopefully, you are seeing me right now. My name's Paul Rotherham. Gives me great pleasure to welcome you to another edition of the Coaching Hour. It's a podcast brought to you in partnership with Coaches Network South Africa, where I'm joined by my colleagues and friend stroke mother-in-law. I'll leave you to figure out who is who, Mary and Mareka. Ladies, hello.
Hi, Paul. I hope I can distinguish who's the mother-in-law here.
We've spoken about it many times, so if you don't know by now, you never will. Lovely to
Yes.
be with you. Thank you so much. Remember, if you are watching this on a platform that allows you to comment, please do. We love it when you interact with us. If you have any questions, fire them off. And of course, like, subscribe, and do all of the other good things to help us promote this show and the platform that is Coaches Network South Africa. Who are we chatting with today, Mareka?
Yes, Paul, it is a privilege to, for the first time, have as a guest Navine Christian with us today. His life purpose is to help business people, entrepreneurs, and managers to identify critical interventions, make decisions confidently, and act efficiently to increase income, profitability, and realize the business's mission. Welcome, Navine. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marika.
Yes, Naveen, before we get into the topic, so today we're talking about the biases that keeps us separated. But before we get there, Naveen, tell us about your journey. How did you get into the coaching space and why?
All right. It's as with most of us, a convoluted journey. I'm one of those people who've always taken a risk. And the longest organizational job I've ever had lasted 5 years. So I worked in organizations for 5 years stints. In the year 2000, I decided, nope, you've got to do this on your own. Why? You are good enough. Did I have a plan? No. So what happened? I started doing skills development and training, and that started in the year 2000. About 15 years ago, though, mentoring became a big thing in the small
Mm,
business development space. I then began mentoring, which was also conflated with coaching at the time.
mm,
At the time, we didn't really have a Comensa in a developed form. Um, and I ran several large projects, 20 to 30 people over multiple months, mentoring small business people. That continued until about 2023. Um, but alongside that, I do a lot of facilitation, skills development, training, and of course, now more formally, coaching. So the journey has been one of offering to people what I call a bundle of competencies, not only coaching, but alongside that, facilitation of your strategy, skills development of whatever needs to be developed in the organization. And my sectors specifically are the smaller non-listed businesses and the passion of my heart, education and schools, where I'm currently doing a great deal of work, specifically in training, facilitation, and team coaching.
mm. Interesting. Thank you, Naveen. Now, being in South Africa and having such a diversity within South Africa, why did diversity specifically become a passion of yours?
It's an issue which affects not only South Africans, but even my international clients. I spoke to one yesterday in Latvia. And globalization is a phenomenon which brings people from different backgrounds together. And very often they don't understand each other in a manner which could boost their performance. Often it will also create conflict. That's in the broader international context. My clients are in Europe, Germany, Latvia, and one in America, one in Turkey as well. Back home, I think the diversity issues are almost obvious for us.
Mm,
It's our history, it's where we come from, it's how we've managed for 350 years to get to know each other, and I think still getting to know each other. Throw into the mix the massive increase in the number of foreigners from other African countries specifically, but also from Asian countries in South Africa today. And we just have this rich melting pot of cultures in which people are trying to understand each other and getting to know each other. And often that comes out in the wrong way or in a difficult way or in an offensive manner.
mm,
So this has happened in schools where we look at organizational conflict because of the histories of of all schools really, foreigner communities coming in, for example, victimization occurring, your more established schools accommodating poorer people from different communities, largely African. And that's created situations of awkwardness, conflict, lots of finger pointing. So, as I say, the schools really are a passion of mine. It's an area which I think we as a country really need to pay more attention to, and we need to develop and build that. We cannot afford for these fundamental institutions to crumble because of something like a misunderstanding of the strengths which diversity could bring, but also the difficulties which they bring.
Naveen, how have you found that? Your experience in the school system? Obviously, it's changed massively over the last 2 decades, I would say. But what is your experience? Because my wife is involved or was, yeah, involved in youth education for quite some time, and she is so incredibly passionate about making a difference at an early stage of life because she feels that if that's where you're able to tap in to these youngsters, there will be a positive outcome where, with all respect, people who are already into their adulthood, very often it can be more challenging to change mindsets and get rid of limiting beliefs and so forth. So how's your experience been in the school system?
So, my specific focus is on working with management and leadership in school teams and in education districts. I, my company does not work with students directly. There's only one instance in which we will work with students directly, and that is with a structure called the RCL, the Representative Council of Learners. The reason we do that is because the RCL has to be represented on the school governing body by law. And that's the only instance in which we'll actually work with students, with young students. Yes, the more difficult part is to deal with the actual management team of the school and by extension with the staff. What has my experience been? Difficult. People often enter their workplaces with set ideas of how the world should be. This is how we have grown up. This is how we have understood the world to be. That may translate to adopting certain stereotypes. Often those stereotypes are backed by issues around poverty, issues around culture, religion, etc., etc., etc. And to try and shift all of that is often results out of conflict which has occurred in the institution first. By the way, this happens in business as well. It
mm,
happens everywhere. But because schools are such visible, high intensity, people orientated environments, the task is quite challenging because you've got, let's say, 1,000 young people in the school and you've got 60 staff members to work with at the same time. And one's got to try and change and improve the environment at the same time. So it is challenging. I prefer to keep a low profile when it comes to diversity work. My focus is on improving performance. And in a coaching setting, we try to do that with individuals and with teams. Increasingly, I'm doing more and more team coaching. I think that might be a potent methodology for resolving many, if not all, but many of the issues which we face. So I prefer not to brand myself as a diversity specialist, but as a coach. And so
Fair
that's how
enough.
I deal with it, Paul.
And 30 years in, has it got better? Using the term better loosely. I say 30 years in from our democracy, obviously.
It's such an interesting question because I was chatting to my coachee in Latvia yesterday and I introduced her to the idea of Ubuntu. And she, of course, had no idea of any of this. And I had to explain to her through oral tradition this philosophy of I am because you are. I had to explain this to her, and she found it illuminating. They currently, in their company, are going through a merger of a Norwegian company with a German company. So it's a Baltic Nordic culture with German culture. And she says she's facing issues of diversity. And some of their managers are from India or Turkey or that part of the Northern Hemisphere. Um, and we then spoke around diversity and how she could conceivably understand her situation better by using Ubuntu as a philosophy. So we're unpacking all of that. Fascinating. I do think South Africa has some important answers for the world.
Expand.
Navine?
Sorry,
Sorry.
Yes.
expand on that, Naveen, just to wrap up. When you say we have some important answers, what do you mean?
A person is a person because of other people. It sounds simple, but when we start to unpack all of that, and we start to look at how that lives in a certain context, like Africa, which was built on oral tradition. Oral tradition forces people to talk to each other. As South Africans, we generally tend to greet each other. We generally tend to acknowledge each other. But in many other cultures, which are more individualistic, possibly there was a lot more focus on individual study, reading, and writing, which is not the way in which African cultures developed. They were oral cultures.
Mm.
I feel it influenced the spirit of the people and the way in which people relate to each other. I think it may have produced a qualitatively different kind of perception of each other. And it's difficult to understand that until one experiences this. Um, Perhaps I'm not being as articulate and elegant as I could be, but I'm not aware of a similar philosophy elsewhere in the world.
Mm.
I think in practical terms, before Mary jumps in, because I know she has a question or a comment, I think in practical terms, you could illustrate that beautifully with, you can probably hear my printers just come on in the background if you hear a strange noise. You can probably represent that with parkrun. And the parkrun community in South Africa will very openly tell you how you go to a different parkrun here in this country, and there is a general sense of acceptance and welcome and well-being and introducing what we call tourists to a new parkrun and visitors, where people I have spoken with who've done parkruns overseas, and parkrun is a global project, as you know, people who have done the same sort of event where you would expect there to be the sense of community and friendly people, go to a park run and they are almost treated like strangers, as if they're almost not even welcome there. Like, who are you? Where are you from? And I think that obviously is generalizing, which is never fair. But you're quite right in terms of South Africans being friendly. And anyone who has traveled the world, that is normally one of the first things that is noted, is just how friendly we are, regardless of culture, background, wealth, privilege. So I like how you've made a parallel or drawn a parallel between the oral traditions, as it were, of Ubuntu, because I think that we do experience that in everyday life, sometimes without even realizing it. So thanks for that, Naveen. Mary.
So what I want to ask you, Navine, is the the what you're doing is really fantastic. What I want to know is, while you're coaching people, they have limiting beliefs and emotional traumas. How do you deal with that? Because you can coach people till kingdom come and they don't change because they have limiting, restrictive beliefs and they have emotional trauma.
Hmm. I think one needs to I had an incident like this yesterday, Mary, so this is very hot at the moment.
Hot off the press.
Um, there's, I have to be careful with this
Mm,
because stereotyping is something which lives in all of us in some form of the or the other, even though we may have actively have tried to diminish this. Even as a coach, I sometimes find it difficult to deal with these limiting behaviors and the resistance, the inertia towards changing towards a more efficient, high performance modality. Trauma, if the trauma is significant, I will refer the person. If it requires some kind of psychological or medical intervention. In my experience, many people would say, yes, it's okay, we're going to try and change. What happens after that, I do not know. The nature of my contracts is such that after 6 months, I do not see them again. So I do not know what the long-term sustainability is of behavior change. Let me give you an example. The question of time, how we perceive time, punctuality, meeting attendance. Uh, I believe there are cultural roots behind this perception of time.
mm,
And in more traditional communities, time may be perceived as something I invest in my background significantly more. I'm concerned about my tradition, my culture, where I come from. Therefore, I have to attend that ceremony and I cannot attend that business meeting. In the case of funerals, this could consume a large amount of time. There are certain rituals, certainly in the Western and Eastern Cape, which we see every year, twice a year. It consumes a large amount of time. That takes priority over any business dealing or need for efficiency, and it affects companies and schools alike. So here we are dealing with deeply held cultural beliefs, which go to the core of people's identity. And how I deal with that is actually to question, to ask, to understand, to appreciate that this, at the core of your identity, this is who you are. I appreciate and understand that. Now, in terms of what we have to do together, can we come to an agreement that we will use our time to achieve this objective? And this might mean that instead of going away for 1 month, could you be back after 2 weeks? And I found that appreciation actually seems to work in some cases. But it involves opening up. It involves my being vulnerable and discarding my perceptions of what efficiency is, because efficiency is not necessarily the core value of that person.
Mm.
The core value of that person is who I am, where I come from, what has put me together. And so these dynamics occur in all cultures. They've just assimilated these values differently.
Mm.
Um, I run a house of students, And my students happen to come from different South African cultures, and they've been with me for 3 or 4 years. You should hear the discussions around my supper table when I do cook supper for us all. It's fascinating. And these are young people between 19 and 22. And it's fascinating to hear what they say. And they are bright as buttons. These guys are sharp, man. So there's no difference in ability, intellectual or otherwise.
Mm.
It's just the sense of self, of who I am, how I've been put together. Don't hurt that. That is the core and the essence of the person. And so that's how I've worked around it.
Mm.
I think it's very noble, and I certainly think we're living in an age where we do need to appreciate backgrounds, diverse cultures. However, I am going to say this, and for fear of offending someone, I think that we are also getting to a stage in life where we are having to be so woke, so politically correct, so sensitive to everyone's needs. And we won't go down the road of people who even identify differently to how they are in reality, because that's a whole new conversation. But I think what people do need to be aware of is, particularly in the business sense, you can only accommodate to a certain extent. You can only extend those lines to a point. And you use the example of punctuality and being available for meetings and so forth. If I were running a business, and I've been part of many businesses over the years, and there is a meeting that is set or things that need to be done and targets, those are fundamental to the business. And if you are a bum on a seat in that business, part of being there is the acceptance that you have to deliver on certain objectives. And I think we've got to be very careful, Navine, in blurring those lines to say, well, actually, my culture says this, or actually, I identify as someone who needs to have XYZ, whatever it might be. And we won't go into the details because I think we'll run out of time. Excuse me. The point being, if you couple this with the policies at the moment in South Africa regarding employment, regarding the world of education, who can get into varsity, who gets jobs when you go through varsity. If you look at this whole big melting pot, I think we're in trouble because a lot of people are in positions that, quite frankly, they shouldn't be in the first place. And you start to understand why businesses choose to be very cautious about operating in countries like South Africa. And that goes beyond the finances. It talks to the people and what the requirements are in South Africa of the specific bums that you have on specific seats. And again, we've got to be careful where we go with this podcast, but I do think we need to be very careful about being so free and loving and understanding and accepting. At the end of the day, ruthlessly speaking, companies are there and exist largely to make a profit and make money. And if you're in a job where you are so sensitive to not being able to do what you need to do because of your background and culture, then perhaps you need to look for a new job. And that
Yes,
might sound harsh, but it's reality. You know, we
there will be trade-offs on both sides.
well, yes
Uh,
and no, and we don't always become opinionated, but I am going to be today because I feel quite passionate about this because I've experienced it myself. I think that it's a very broad topic that could probably do with some really deep digging. But let's give a practical example, for instance, of cultures where for a month you leave. Can you imagine trying to run a business in practical terms? If I look at the businesses I'm involved in, if I try and think of making do without a key person in that business for a month, I,
Collect.
that's a tall order.
Mm.
There are practical realities to consider, and if that person is so key, perhaps they shouldn't be in that kind of position. However, as I've mentioned, there will be trade-offs to be made. On a mass level, we'll see, for example, the difficulty of scheduling something like a school timetable, because so many thousands of young students are still away out of the city in areas where their families are located. They'd come back to school late. Teachers sometimes come back to school a few weeks late. This
Sure.
causes complete havoc with the timetable, with allocations, and so on. And this has been going on for a long time. So it's ongoing work. It's not going to change quickly. That's at a school level, at a popular level, the mass population. When it comes to key people in a business, there we are working one-on-one. And people who are in key positions, it is easier to work with those people on a one-on-one or team basis with smaller numbers in a more well-defined environment.
Mm.
Here we can actually use specific models and question people as to why do you believe this? Use the ladder of inference. Where does your thinking come from? Help that person to excavate why I'm so motivated not to be at work or to do other things. What is it? That
Mm.
kind of growth it can be achieved on an individual basis, but that's going to require long-term coaching and asking the difficult questions.
Which I think you've raised now. And I mean, sometimes our conversations on the podcast do become perhaps a little bit uncomfortable, if I'm honest. And I think, thank goodness for people like you who are doing this work, because I feel that many South Africans, and again, I may be generalizing, are living in the past and continue to live in the past. And somebody once gave such a beautiful analogy. I'm a car guy, I love cars. And they gave an analogy. They said, have you ever noticed when you're driving, your rear view mirror is this size? It's a tiny little piece of glass attached to your windscreen, but your windscreen is 100 times the size. And they said it's a wonderful metaphor for life, because your windscreen is the size that it is because you should be looking forward. The rear view mirror should only be playing a very small part of your driving experience. Yes, it's important and it's there and you recognize it. And I'd like to draw the parallel between that and life. Recognize your traditions. We all have them, regardless of race. Recognize your history, your culture, all the things that make you who you are. Absolutely. But look ahead. And sometimes I think that the challenge, particularly with South Africa, I can't speak on the part of European countries, it's probably the same. We live in the past, and it's like driving with the handbrake on. It's like trying to sail a ship with the anchor down. And yeah, I don't want to focus on this, but I think it must be exceptionally challenging, just having heard the few things that you've spoken about. I mean, the fact that people go away for a month at a time, I'm gobsmacked by that because I've never experienced it. So to hear that you have schools where learners and teachers just don't come back for weeks, for me and my culture and how I process things, that is like off the wall. That is just crazy. And I'm not judging their culture, but for me, that is a rather strange thing to hear.
Yes, what makes it easier is to understand and accept the kind of social context in which we live. These are traditions, habits, and behaviors which have come on for hundreds and thousands of years. They're going to change, but slowly. And when one accepts that, it enables a different ability to work with individuals. So the system itself is going to change. And yes, much of our society is rooted in, if we call it the past, in tradition, culture, my community, all of that. It is known that your more individualistic cultures in Europe, in North America, tend to be more forward-looking, but they also tend to be less communal. So the advantages of Ubuntu, on the one hand, which are based and rooted in communalism, now contradict this desire for efficiency and a modern forward-looking society. So where do we want to be? And South Africa is never going to be Japan. It's simply not the value system of the country. So let's understand and accept where we are. Now, what can we do and improve our performance within that context? And it's going to take that kind of ambidextrous thinking in order to get to where we want to be. We've had 30 years. It seems to be a long time, probably not that long. We're going to need another 30 years to try and address these issues. But social change takes a long time to
Mm.
effect. In the business context, we can do it more quickly because if we identify the key individuals, we can work with those individuals, share various models with them. They are wonderful models of thinking. I'm not going to call them psychological models. They're models of thinking. What are your filters? How do you perceive the world? Why do you perceive the world in that way? There's a ladder of inference on, it's a selection of data and how we decide to develop beliefs based on that data. Um, Drari's window. I mean, you coaches, you'd understand. It's a wonderful tool. It can potentially create conflict, but out of that conflict comes understanding when managed correctly. So, yes, Paul, I do hear the concern about where we are as a country. But why would we want to be Japan anyway? I want Ubuntu.
100%. I think if you wanted to be Japan, go and live in Japan. I mean, I'm British. If I wanted to live in the UK, that's where I'd be living. So I'm certainly not saying that we need to now change and become the country that we are not. But I think that there are, as a populace, there are major concerns about where we're going and how we are getting there. And living in the past, inverted commas, is not going to help anyone. Um, but yeah, I think lots to be said. Just to add this as well, personally, I'm certainly not suggesting that one culture is right and the other is wrong. Please understand that. We are all different. And I think that's what this podcast is all about today. It's understanding that we're different, embracing those differences, and figuring out the way forward.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mary
yes.
Yeah.
or Mareka?
Now, what I wanted to agree with is I agree, Naveen, that you say it's easier in organizations and companies. And I think it's because there is such this big movement in terms of coaching versus training back in the day, where it's more individualized, there's more mindset changes that's occurring, because I feel that's the space where we are, as coaches, creating that awareness. There was a lack of awareness, so we all lived in our silos and we think the way that we do and we have our traditions. And that's why, we thought about speaking about the unconscious biases that we have that we don't even know that we do. Because the fact that we don't know what those biases are, we are so set in our thinking. But the more we become aware of these biases, the more our eyes open up. There's one, for example, interesting bias that I read about recently, beauty bias. And I never actually thought about that. So, beauty bias is where we assume someone that is attractive or beautiful is more intelligent or efficient than someone that is not. Which is ridiculous if you think about it. However, it is a phenomenon. What other biases stands out for you, Naveen, that you notice often before we wrap up today's session?
Biases or microaggressions, as we may
Mm,
sometimes call them. These are these small, invisible, little hostilities which manifest. I do like the beauty concept. One of the examples we had was the issue around hair at
mm,
schools.
Mm.
And probably also in the workplace, what is the dress code and what should one look like in order to be a professional or a proper good student? And I
Mm.
mean, look, this issue is going to recur. It's going to come up again and again and again.
mm,
Um, and at the end of the day, the governing bodies of schools, in the schools case, would have to come up with a dress code to which all parents agree. And in companies, one could similarly have something like that. I've not really been aware of some major issues in companies regarding hair specifically. But certainly at the school level, it has been an issue. Your question, Mareka, was
yes. What biases do you note in, let's say, corporate environments that plays a big role that people are not aware of?
I think stereotyping still lives deeply in many of
Mm,
us. Um, that kind of person cannot be as good because they speak more slowly. Well, have you thought it's this person's second language? Have you thought that perhaps this person's thinking style is a slower thinking style? There might be, again, cultural influences on, we do not immediately negate what somebody else says. There are those sorts of influences which I think microaggressions, we need to be aware of them. They're very, very tiny little things, but cumulatively, what happens is it might frustrate the person who is actually really thinking about it, trying to come up with a solution, but is blocked because another cultural perception is you've got to be quick, you've got to answer quickly, you've got to give me the answer now, and you've got to say it confidently, and so on and so forth. Whereas the other person may be saying, hang on, I need to be respectful, let me be slower, let me think about it and give you a quality answer. So we might actually come up with a better solution if we understood each other. And again, time is an issue here.
Yes.
Maybe if we did things a bit more slowly. And so my take on all of this is I don't want to be like Europe. Why should we be like Europe? We are African. What can we do together? And yes, we may not be as efficient as Europe. Heavens, we might not be as profitable as Europe, but is your life better?
Very
Decidedly,
true.
I don't want to live in Europe. I want to live here. Why? Because of the Ubuntu of this place. And
It's
so,
very well said.
personally, as a coach, this is where I'd want to kind of plant my flag.
And I think we all feel the same, albeit I think it would be remiss of us to question things because nothing is ever going to be perfect. We acknowledge that. And I think as coaches specifically, we are in a space where we can begin conversations, we can host conversations as we're doing with you today. We can understand something and perceive things that we've never seen in that way. And I do think that you are quite right in comparing us with first world, let's call them that, first world countries. You mentioned Japan, Europe, and so forth. Um, Although I would possibly argue that some of those so-called first world countries, people wouldn't want to live in at all now, looking at what's going on in some of them. But I think you're quite right. There is a magic and something very special, a magic nature to Africa, even though it comes with what Westerners would refer to as challenges. And I think that if you're going to live here, you need to embrace and understand that we are not functioning in the same way. However, and this is the caveat to that statement, I do think that there is room for change. Let's not call it improvement, but room for change. And I think that it's great that you're doing what you're doing, facilitating those conversations and even talking about hair. I remember, and we all remember, the articles that have hit us front page of the news where students are being criticized for certain hairstyles at schools. And on the surface, Paul, the European Paul, who was born in the UK, would say, well, the rules of the school are boom, boom, boom. Therefore, if you're not conforming, yes, you should be expelled or you should be given detention or what. That's the superficial level of Paul. But as you start digging a little deeper, and as you've explained today, you realize, no, 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 hang on. This is not somebody who is deliberately going about to just disrespect the rules. This is someone whose appearance is based on a cultural belief that has been in the family for generations. Just as we, as Westerners, let's call them that, or Europeans, just as we have our traditions, other cultures have theirs. And I think it really is difficult. You hit the nail on the head when you said 30 years is not long. For us, it feels long because it's like, come on now, let's get things working. Let's fix the things that are broken. But in the bigger scheme of things, these cultural beliefs and behaviors and traditions are hundreds, if not thousands of years old. You're not going to change them in a century, never mind 30 years.
I think that Africa is real. That's how I see Africa as real. We are more real than that's just my opinion, but I just sense that in my environment.
Mm.
Authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Veen, it's for me, it's been a very insightful conversation. I think you've opened my eyes to a couple of things, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you very much for joining us. And I think bias is something that if you are not on the receiving end, you probably don't give it much thought. It's like your health. Only when you wake up one day with that terribly sore throat and pounding head do you think, wow, I was feeling great for the last month. Now I feel terrible. Until then, the thought of being ill or sick was never on your mind. And I think it's the same with this is if you are the person who is in the firing line, whoa, hang on, now it hits you. But for those of us who are just going about our business, perhaps looking at others going, jeepers, man, you're always late, you're never here, whatever it might be. That's just one example. And I know, Mary, you are in a wonderful position. I don't know if you know this, Navine, but Mary runs a project called Shaping Champions. And now is obviously not the time to go into detail because it would be a long conversation. We actually did a podcast on it a short while ago. But Mary, I'm sure that what Navine was saying today resonated with you hugely because you are literally in that world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Acceptance is the key word.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Mareka, anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I think this topic is quite vast, as we've mentioned. I mean, we only touched on a few of the biases, only a few. I mean, there's so
Yeah.
many. And I realize the impact when I also do facilitation work of bringing it to the surface, to bringing it to your awareness. For example, you mentioned earlier, Naveen, that sometimes unknowingly you can offend someone. Something, for example, I didn't know. Some of the cultures are offended if someone from my culture that speaks Afrikaans, and if you find someone from another culture that speaks well Afrikaans, and you give them a good intentioned compliment to say, wow, you speak very well Afrikaans, they take offense to that because what makes a difference? Yes, I speak well Afrikaans, so what? So we don't realize that we might be offending someone because of different perceptions. Yeah, we have to always tread carefully, but it's with acceptance and awareness that we don't get offended then, knowing that maybe the person's intentions wasn't to, and so forth. But it is a wide topic. I would love us to, at some point, explore specific biases because it's important to bring awareness, because with awareness, we can be open-minded.
Yeah, we
You
often
can't
aren't
please
aware.
everybody, though.
Mm.
Sorry. You can't please everybody all the time.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah, we often aren't aware of the little things which may be irritators. And when I do a lot of conflict management work, and I use various psychometrics and so on sometimes to do this work. At the same time, I like to use humor when facilitating, particularly. But there are times when humor can be interpreted as sarcasm. Or there's an ironical element to it. So one's going to be very careful, Mareka. As you mentioned, you might think you're complimenting somebody, but it might create offense. So it's these little things. But at the end of the day, what will get us through all of this is when we do simple things, when we do learn each other's languages, when I learn to greet you in Sesotho, when I learn to say thank you in isiZulu, when we appreciate each other's food, when we start to cook together, when we talk about our common or about our cultural traditions around a meal. We take a walk on the beach and talk about our families. These are very, very simple things, but those are the things that at an interpersonal level bring people together. And so once we start identifying people, as human beings, as Ubuntu, that is when we start to solve the problem.
Navine, we will leave it there. I think you've summed it up beautifully at the end there. So thank you very, very much. And I look forward to chatting with you again. You've certainly opened my eyes personally to a few things that I'll try and be mindful of. And I think the key word here is curiosity. Be curious.
Yeah.
Curiosity and I think respect go hand in hand. And very often what we perceive to be is not the case at all. What we see at the superficial level is actually not what's going on in the background, however that looks. So thank you for joining us, Navine. Lastly, we
Pleasure.
always like to kind of give you a punt, as it were. Where can we find you? Are you on social media? Do you have a website?
The website is called thinkbusiness.expert.
Interesting. A dot expert.
.expert.
Okay. Thinkbusiness.expert. Wonderful. And are you on socials at all?
I do have a channel, but it's not active, so let's not talk about
Okay.
that for now.
100%. 100%. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Navine, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate your time. I'm sure
Thank
we can
you.
have another chat in future just to dig a little deeper into those biases and open our eyes to the things that in everyday life are happening that we're not even aware of.
Yeah. Thank you.
Lovely. Marika, Mary, thank you very much as always. Be warm, be well, and thank you for joining us for this edition of the Coaching Hour. Cheers for now.